So welcome to this Latin American panel. We are really happy to have you here today. And let me start this panel by saying, giving me the chance to say thanks to PRI for giving us the opportunity to start showcasing what is happening in Latin America around responsible investment. We have a lot to catch up. We have a lot of opportunities in the region to move the responsible investment agenda forward. So these kind of opportunities to talk about what is happening in the region is really important. So thanks to PRI for giving us the opportunity to speak about our region. I also want to say thanks to my fellow speakers today, especially we started engaging with them a couple of months ago, and they were really happy and willing to join us today and be part of this panel. So thanks a lot for taking the time and travel here to San Francisco and join us in this event. So thanks a lot. And also, I need to say thanks to all of you, because I was joking with Juan Luis yesterday, and we were saying that we are competing with other two great panels. So it's really good for us that you take the time to come here to learn more about Latin America, and we wish you that this is going to be a very good panel for you to get more information about what is happening in the region, and especially what are the opportunities we are seeing in the region for institutional investors. I just want to begin giving you a brief overview of some of the challenge we have. So I say at the beginning that this is like a step forward for us to really bring Latin America into the PRI initiative, and this is what is happening right now. So we are right now, we have 12 signatories in the region. So as you can see, we have a lot of work to do to catch up to the rest of the world. But we are in the process. I'm happy to say that things are happening, and this panel, again, is a good example that Latin America is going to move forward in coming years around responsible investment. And also, we are really looking to use this panel as a way to show that there are a lot of opportunities in the region around the promotion of responsible investment, but the promotion especially of sustainable development in Latin America. And I really like to show this picture, because what you can see here is that we now have this framework of how we need to go in the next 12 years to have a more sustainable society. And what we are seeing in the region is that we are using those frameworks like the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, and we are translating that into the context of Latin America. So again, there is a lot of opportunities to have or to do sustainable investments in the region, and that's part of what we want to show today in the panel. So I want to start by giving the floor to Amal-Lee. She works in IDB. She's the head of the Climate Change Division. And we're really happy to have Amal-Lee here today, because the idea is that she is going to start by giving us an overview of what is happening in LATAM from the perspective of IDB. So Amal, thanks a lot for being here, and just please tell us about what you are seeing in the Latin American continent.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Is that, can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So just to explain a little bit about IDB Group, we're the Inter-American Development Bank Group, so the regional development bank for Latin America and the Caribbean. And the IDB now is the bank that works with governments and other public sector entities. And our sister, who comes within the IDB group, is IDB Invest, that has a particular focus on mobilizing investors for Latin America and the Caribbean. So we cover many sectors. However, broadly speaking, roughly 70% of what we do is infrastructure, with quite a broad definition of infrastructure, including water, sanitation, even like looking at green buildings. Now we have a focus on social infrastructure, green buildings, schools, hospitals. We would refer to coastal zone management as infrastructure too. So quite a broad definition, definitely not just toll roads and ports, as someone mentioned yesterday, is how infrastructure tends to be interpreted. And we, because of this and because of recognizing that all our governments, we have 26 client countries within the region, committed to the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and then also the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is, broadly speaking, about mobilizing investors, the otherwise known as the billions to trillions agenda. And that's really quite heavily focused on infrastructure. So we at the IDB Group have brought these together where we see now a focus on sustainable infrastructure as really being key to delivering on all those objectives, and the extent to which we can support our countries through investments in sustainable infrastructure is really a major priority for us, both the bank and IDB Invest. We partnered with Mercer back in early 2016 to see really, to ask investors what we as an MDB could do to better mobilize and increase allocation to sustainable infrastructure. And some of the key messages we got back were, yes, interested in infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure, but no formalized strategy, and also confusion as to what sustainable infrastructure really is or means. And a lot of different frameworks, initiative, principles, etc. out there. So we decided, and one of the key messages then was, okay, how can you help define better what sustainable infrastructure means? So we've been working on that and have created a sustainable infrastructure framework with 4 main dimensions, including economic and financial, social, environmental, and institutional. Within our environmental, that includes issues ranging from biodiversity to climate resilience, so resilience to impacts of climate change. But then also importantly in the institutional criteria, and this was a key message we got back from investors, I think probably made more of an issue by the task force on climate-related climate risk financial disclosure, that the concern over whether or not governments were serious about, if they're serious about implementing their Paris Agreement and the SDGs, then they really needed to reflect that in their infrastructure planning and the projects being brought forward. So within our institutional criteria is a particular focus on to ensure that there is alignment between international agreements and national actions, frameworks, planning processes. And so this is now an area that we're working very much with several countries in the region to really look at how this framework can help better guide the types of project planning and investments. One of the key aspects as well, and again, we're getting back to this issue of concerns over policy risk and lack of coherency between different objectives, we recognize that this framework shouldn't just be applied at the project design phase. Most tools and standards that are out there for sustainable infrastructure are very focused on project preparation and design, which is great, but may not be sufficient because, as we were seeing, that the sustainability criteria really need to be integrated up into the public-private partnership guidelines, procurement, other regulatory measures. measures relating to planning, looking at taking a portfolio planning approach, etc., to really deliver on the sustainability of the infrastructure investments. So that's where we are in terms of the IDB group and working with countries. We're probably most advanced in Mexico at the moment. We're now partnering with Banobras, who is one of the major national development banks in Mexico that has a particular focus on infrastructure. So we're working with them to use the framework to help to provide the necessary indicators and a methodology by which they can try to guide different projects coming forward through the pipeline, and really hopefully through that starting to provide much greater signals to investors that these project pipelines are coming forward with a common set of criteria. So, which should hopefully reduce some of the uncertainty, reduce transaction costs, enable better aggregation, etc. So really trying to address some of the challenges that we know investors face with regards to investing in assets that are not liquid, and this chicken and egg situation of getting to a liquid market for sustainable infrastructure. And we're working also with several partners. There's a very interesting platform called Source, which is developed by the Sustainable Infrastructure Foundation. That is, it's something we're using as the IDB. Most MDBs and our multilateral development banks are starting to use it, and also several of our governments, for example, Chile. And this platform is a way of helping provide more standardization around project preparation. So we're now inserting our criteria around sustainability into that. And so that should address some of the challenges we see in helping to bring forward the investments that are attractive to people such as yourselves and your organizations. I'm not sure, how much time do I have now? Okay, so I'll just give because I know you're going to come back with a question. I didn't want to speak for too long, but just to highlight as well, and come back to this maybe, we're also, as the IDB group, but also through our public sector, through the National Development Bank, in the region. We're also working on bringing forward different types of products that can be attractive. And we're hoping to use our framework to actually start to develop or structure some sustainable infrastructure bonds, potentially for ourselves as an institution to issue those to go into investments of sustainable infrastructure, but probably more importantly working with governments in the region that may be interested in issuing national sovereign green bonds, but using the sustainable infrastructure framework, as well as with corporates and other private sector participants. So I'll stop there. Happy to come back on that. Thank you.
And thanks, Amal-Lee. And I want to also ask you about some of the opportunities. And I was showing this slide about the SDGs. And I think it's important, again, to say that one of the challenges that we faced in Latin America in our history is this lack of long-term planning of how we are going to move our countries forward. So for us, having an initiative like the SDGs is very important, and we are seeing countries through Latin America, governance in Latin America, really seeing the SDGs as a good platform to move forward and define long-term initiatives. So I want to ask you, maybe if you can give us like an example of things that you are doing from IDB that are like connecting with the SDG agenda.
Okay, so as I said, we're trying to bring together the SDG and also the Paris Agreement, the country's own nationally determined contribution, because we see that this is one and the same agenda. You cannot have parallel competing agendas. And that's important for us as an institution because we have different people working on climate, working on infrastructure, potentially also at SDGs, so trying to bring that together. And that's really important for governments to do, to ensure there is policy coherency and they're sending the right signals to investors in particular. And so, for example, in Brazil, we've been working we created a platform there called Infra Invest, should be Sustainable Infra Invest, but Infra Invest for Brazil, bringing together key stakeholders, government, in particular the Ministry of Planning, that has the responsibility, obviously, for more medium and longer term planning. And this really has emerged through a conversation, actually. I mean, it was a conversation I actually had with the one of the secretaries in the Ministry of Planning, where he said, how can Brazil benefit from this green technological revolution, as well as digitalization, and implement our climate and SDG agenda? And we discussed and said, well, why don't we find out? Why don't we bring together all the relevant stakeholders, particularly investors, particularly domestic capital market representatives, to see what are some of the challenges and then opportunities to be addressed in Brazil. We had one very initial dialogue that was really valuable in identifying some of the key barriers, some of which are actually already being addressed through various measures, and this is an ongoing process where starting to identify how specific opportunities can be maximized. And one particular area is the idea to, particularly at the municipal level, the need to raise more capital for more sustainable infrastructure there. So starting to think and potentially work to develop municipal sustainable infrastructure, green bonds.
That's very good. That's very good. Yeah, so I think in summary, there are a lot of opportunities, especially in infrastructure. So I think that's a good thing to start, like giving you some ideas to realize that LATAM have a lot of opportunities around SDGs, around the climate change agreement, and especially all of that looking into sustainable and environmental infrastructure, green infrastructure. So thanks a lot, Amal-Lee. So, and now we want to also use this panel to talk about like this good case that we have in the region. So for some years, Brazil has been the example for the rest of the countries in LATAM about how to move forward with responsible and sustainable investment. So I have the opportunity to meet Sonia some time ago in a brief travel that you make to Bogota when we invite you to an event there. And so I'm really happy to have you here today. And I really want you to give us a better overview of what's happening in Brazil. Why is responsible investment a reality in your country? And from your experience, Sonia is the director of sustainability, communications, and media relations in B3, in the Brazil Stock Exchange. So I know that you are very well positioned to give us an overview of why and what's happening in Brazil around responsible investment. So Sonia, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, PRI, for this kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here to share our experience. First of all, a few words about B3. B3 is the Brazilian Stock Exchange, and also we act on a OTC sector. We are based in São Paulo, and we have offices in London and Shanghai. I will share with you our case, what we have been doing in Latin America, especially in Brazil, because we are in the middle, we are in the center of the capital market, so we know our responsibility to foster responsible investment within investors, listed companies, analysts, and so on. So we have many initiatives. We divided these initiatives in 5 lines of action. Which is B3's internal agenda, because we are a listed company, products and services, transparency is the name of the game, in fact, education, and influences and partnerships. I selected 2 lines to talk to you in my first speech, which is the products and services and influences and partnerships. In products and services, I would like to highlight our experience with indexes, sustainability indexes, because we strongly believe that the indexes are a very powerful instrument to foster the responsible investment, to talk to investors, and also to stimulate the listed companies to adopt this agenda. We have some sustainability indexes at B3, the Corporate Governance Index, the Carbon Efficient Index, and also the Corporate Sustainability Index, ISE. ISE was the fourth sustainability index launched in the world. The first one, it was Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and then London, Johannesburg, and then Brazil. So we have a long history working with this index. Why I say that indexes are so important to foster this agenda? First of all, because the index is a theoretical reference to the investors. So the investors who are looking for sustainable companies, the companies that are applying this agenda, can look at the indexes and, of course, have a theoretical reference that bring the stamp from the exchange. But more than this, when we have a product linked to the index, this is the key thing. For example, we have ETFs based on ISE and based on ICO2. So the investors not only have the theoretical reference, but the product that they can invest in. So I strongly recommend all stock exchanges in Latin America to develop an index, and we also have been helping other exchanges with our experience to start applying index. And a very important thing, 4 years ago, we included in the questionnaire, the Corporate Sustainability Index questionnaire, a question asking to the companies allow us to publish their answers. As I said, transparency is the name of the game, and we know that investors need this kind of information, ESG information, in order to take a complete decision making. So we included this question. During 4 years, it was a voluntary question, of course, but after 4 years, we saw that the majority of the companies were disclosing their answers. So from now on, from 2 years ago, it was a pre-request. So to participate in the process, it's necessary to disclose their answers. So you investors, if you go now to the ISE website, you see all the answers that the listed companies gave to us. So again, it's a transparency, it's disclosure, and we think it's a very good experience. The other line that I selected to share with you is influences and partnerships. We invest a great part of our time participating in boards, doing things in partnership. For example, we were the first stock exchange in emerging markets to be signatory to the PRI. We were the first stock exchange in the world to be signatory to the Global Compact in 2004. Also, I am a member of the CDP Latin America Board, GRI Brazil Advisory Group. We were the found signatory to the Sustainable Stock Exchange, and I have other things to say, but I'm not saying it to annoy you, but just to emphasize that we think to be in partnership, to be together, is a key element for the success in this journey. Because we know, unfortunately, sustainability is still a new agenda. ESG factors, that's why we are here talking about it. One day it will want to be necessary to talk about it, but sustainability is still a new agenda. So when we are with the other, talking about dilemmas, talking about problems, and how we can act together to solve, it's very, very fruitful and important. Because we can build common proposals, common tools, and common solutions. So we invest great time on this. And Eduardo also asked me to bring some tips or to bring some lessons learned that we had in our journal. And the first one, I think is important to emphasize that we work hand in hand with the regulator in Brazil. We are not a regulator, we are a self-regulator, and if you want one day to have ESG factors as a mainstream it's completely necessary to be hand in hand to work with the regulator. We have a very good relation with the regulator in Brazil, and it's necessary. I will give a short case, and we can talk more in the question and answer session about a case named Reporter Explain for Sustainability Report. We launched it in 2012, Rio Plus 20. It was a voluntary initiative to the listed companies. So we asked to the companies, answer us if they were publishing a sustainability report, or explain why not. So we developed this initiative for 4 years, again, voluntary initiatives, and then the regulator in Brazil turned it into a mandatory request. So now we don't need to do this anymore. We changed for Report to Explain for Sustainability to Integrate report based on SDGs. It's a new one. We launched it last year. I can talk more later. But this journey from voluntary to mandatory, in our case, is very important, and it's a successful one. I know that this point, voluntary versus mandatory, is a hot topic. Depends on, in my opinion, depends on the region, depends on the reality. In one reality can work very well, mandatory one, but in the others, voluntary one. In our case, in Brazil, we strongly believe that we can have huge results with voluntary. But what's important, Eduardo and everyone, this kind of initiative has a shelf life. So after 4 years, what we learned after 4 years, the results were the same, stable. So in this case, it's necessary to go in a mandatory perspective. So this is the second tip or second lessons learned that I would like to share. And the last one is about communication. I'm a journalist. I'm from the communication side, and I always say that I'm at sustainability field only because I'm a communication person. I have this belief. Because again, sustainability is still a new agenda. So it's necessary to communicate, to say what we are doing, to do things like this, again, to share dilemmas, to share problems in order to advance. So the last tip is communicate. Make a strategic plan, do with another places, do events, publications, and communicate. Because, you know, I think everyone here has the same dilemmas, the same ideas, and when we are together, we can go stronger. Because in the end of the day, I think don't leave no one behind. That's what we are looking for. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sonia. And especially, thanks a lot. I really ask you when we prepare the panel that you gave us some tips. So it's really important for us to have these ideas coming from a market that is closer to us in Latin America as Brazil is. So it's really important, and I want to make an emphasis in two things that Sonia is saying. So the first one is indexes, and I need to say from my previous job, I really have the opportunity to see the impact that the Brazil Sustainability Index create in the market. So we really think that's important, and that's part of what we are going to try to push in LATAM is the value of those indexes to increase the focus on responsible investment. And we are seeing some good news and updates around that. So, for example, today we have this announcement of the DJSI indexes, and we now have a Latin American index that covers Peru, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. And for example, Grupo Banorte that Ursula is representing today, they are joining this select list. So congratulations about that. So, and that shows that is happening, that we have in the region, as Sonia says, in Brazil, but also in other countries in LATAM, companies that are potential investments for all of you, that are good companies doing a good job on sustainability issues, And I think that's important for us to show. And then the other thing is regulations. So I completely agree. I'm 2 months into this challenge, into this job, and we already have a lot of conversations with institutional investors in the region saying to us that if regulation is part of the mix of all the things that are going to be necessary to promote ESG integration in the region, that could be huge. And we are seeing some things happening in Mexico and also in Colombia, in Chile, regulators talking about ESG integration. So the examples in Brazil, I think, are really important for us to have like the experience to go ahead with these kind of things. So thank you very much for the tips. And now we are coming to a part of the panel that for us is very important, because we are really happy to have the opportunity to showcase the leadership of 2 of our signatories. I was joking a little bit that we have 20% of our signatories here today in the table. But it's really important that we have the opportunity to allow them to explain why they are seeing opportunities to join PRI. What are the value that we are providing, and why you decide to join us and be part of this. And also from the perspective of Mexico and Chile, that you can also tell us more about what you are seeing in your market and why you think responsible investment is something that should happen and will happen in coming years in the region. So Ursula is, as I say, she works in Grupo Financiero Banorte. She's the head of investor relations and ESG. So Ursula, thanks a lot for being here in San Francisco, and please tell us more about the experience of Banorte and the connection with responsible investment.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, PRI, for inviting us to talk to you, and thank you for being here and listening to us. Banorte, let me also give you a brief background on the company. Today is the 2nd largest financial group in Mexico. We have operations in banking, asset management, pension fund management, and insurance. I think one of the differentiators of Banorte is that we are a listed company. We are one of the oldest financial groups listed in Mexico, and we are probably the most public company of the listed companies in Mexico. Almost 87% of our shares are held by institutional investors outside of Mexico, in North America, in UK and Europe, and in Asia and Latin America too. So we implemented our ESG program back in 2009 at that time, it was out of a requirement from the IFC. We were coming right out of the global financial crisis, and we signed an agreement with the IFC they became shareholders of the bank, a minority shareholder of the bank. And within this agreement, there was a requirement that the bank had to incorporate evaluation and assessment of environmental impact within the loan portfolio. So this was the first step that we took. Over time, we set up a formal ESG group and a formal ESG program. We have been using as a framework the things that are out there in the international front. For example, on the loan portfolio reviews, we not only use the IFC evaluation standards, but we also incorporated many years ago the Equator Principle standards. We also are part of the UNEP FI. We adopted the SDGs. And last year, we became signatories of PRI. And we are just starting implementation of the principles in our asset management operations. My colleague Claudia from Asset Management is here, and also my colleague Marius, she runs the ESG group in Banorte, are also here. And we are implementing them in our pension fund manager. It's Afore Banorte 21. It is the largest private pension fund manager in Mexico, with a market share of 25% of assets under management. So it is a very relevant company in the market because of the size and because of the investments that it is making. And we are also implementing them in Operadora, which is the company that manages mutual funds for our clients at the bank and also at the wealth management business. I would like to talk about what has been our experience in the evaluation of our loan portfolio, because I think this is relevant. This is going to be relevant for assessing and evaluating the investments that we are making. In Mexico, as you know, one of the greatest challenges that we have is there are still only a few companies that are adopting formal ESG programs and that are providing information on what they are doing and so on. So it is a difficult task to evaluate the investments. When we started evaluating our loan portfolio, initially we had a lot of resistance from within the bank, as you can imagine. People from the business areas, the corporate division and the middle market division, they resisted it because they were saying that it was going to become a problem with customers by asking them for more information, that it was going to take longer to satisfy the loan requests and so on. And we overcame this barrier. Today, our credit environmental and social evaluation is part of the credit flow process. It flows naturally. We do a lot of training on credit officers and business people. We are requested today to participate in projects. They call us and they say, "Look, you have to come and take a look at this project." Customers are initially we thought they are not going to like this, but it has been the opposite. They welcome these due diligences that we do. They welcome the advisory that we give them and the recommendations. So it, rather than becoming an inhibitor of credit, it has become an enhancement and providing value to the overall business proposition that we give to the customers and the business relation that we want to build with our customers. We think that, or we are hopeful that this is going to be a similar case as we move on the investment side. Because from what we have seen in Mexico, both of our companies, our investment companies, the focus of investment is within Mexico. So if you look at the assets that they are investing in, is mostly Mexican assets. The Afore can invest in international assets, and they are been doing so, but they are doing this through mandates, and the ESG component is included in the mandates that they are doing. So the role that we think that we are going to play in the initial years in implementation of the PRI principles is really related to engaging other players in the market to start being more active in the ESG front and providing a lot more information. There are a lot of challenges because in Mexico, I think different maybe to Brazil, the local capital market has not developed as much on the equity side, but from other types of financing vehicles. For example, we have for the real estate market, we have the FIBRAs, There's been a lot of infrastructure investment in Mexico, especially in electricity and in oil in the last 6 years, as you can imagine, coming from the energy reform. And a lot of these investments are being financed through SECADES. SECADES is another type of investment vehicle specifically for infrastructure. We also have in the education sector another investment vehicle, especially for education. All of these are going through the public market. They are going out through the stock exchange. But the rules, let's say, on governance, on disclosure of information, even financial information, are different than what we have for companies that are listed in the equity market. So I think part of the work that we need to do is to, put a little bit more of a level playing field within the larger financial market in Mexico, in terms of corporate governance, in terms of environmental actions and environmental impact, and also on the social front.
Thanks. And again, I think it's one of the objectives of this panel is to demonstrate that things are happening, because when I show these numbers, this is not the complete picture of what is happening in the region. And we are working, and we are going to work very hard to change those numbers and to see and to express a new reality of the region, but things are happening. So that's why having the experience of Banorte and the Mexico perspective is very important. And that's why also I want to say to Juan Luis that he can also given us an overview of what you are seeing from the Moneda perspective. Juan Luis Rivera is the partner in Moneda Asset Management, and I think it's very important for us to know more about what you are seeing in the market, and also why you as an organization decide to join a PRI, and what you are seeing the value is of being a leader in this movement of responsible investment in the region.
Thank you. So yeah, 2 words on Moneda. We're an independent asset manager, originally from Chile. We actually had the IFC of the World Bank as a founding shareholder in '93. So there's a lot that the IFC and the World Bank, different units do in the region, and we're thankful for that. And we invest in equity and credit all across the region. We run about $8 billion for almost exclusively for large institutions, and we invest with a long-term time horizon. So I think for us, in one way or another, it used to be called SRI, used to be called something else before that. We've been doing this since day one, especially since we had the IFC, as a shareholder upon founding. So we're long-term investors. We're fundamental, bottom-up. We own companies. We think as owners. And if you're an owner of a company, you need to think about, all these things: governance, social, environment. You're not operating in a vacuum, and sooner or later, if you cut corners, you get in trouble. So this is essential to our way of thinking. And I'll tell you a little bit of the process. We just signed in April this year. It took us 2 years to get fully comfortable with the idea of signing up, and I think that had to do with, I think there's a bit of a labeling or a branding issue with some of the responsible investing approaches, and they probably the old ones, which had to do with negative screening and divestment and blacklists. So a lot of other people internally at our firm and our clients said, but you know what, we don't like blacklists. You do your job, you take these things into account, you make the decision. If you think it's the right investment, if you think things are getting better, you can make a difference, you should go ahead and do it. We spent a long time just getting comfortable that, what the PRI meant, what it did not mean, what you had to do, what was not required. And I think I was talking to a CIO of the largest pension from Chile last week, and he's like, if Volkswagen, you think corruption is exclusive to Latin America and cheating and all these things, but it's not. Volkswagen is a pretty good reputation, old, well-run company, and they got in a huge mess. So this guy runs $50 billion. He has, half of his portfolio with outside managers. Does he needs to start calling each of the managers to say, do you own Volkswagen? And if they do I have to sell the fund? So that's the sort of anxiety that these things produce in some asset owners. So I think, you know, we got comfortable. I think we're going to help Eduardo and the PRI to get the people in our region comfortable, and I think that's going to help and benefit everyone. So I think this is a good platform. Let me just go back to Latin America. If this were a product, I think we have a very serious branding issue. So you say Latin America in an investment context, and people say like, oh, no way, I'm not touching this. You know, this is just uninvestable. And I think, you know, there are some bad things, obviously, and I think those capture a disproportionate amount of attention and press, and it usually is that way with bad news and good news these days. But all the good stuff we've heard here, you never read about, right? So I think, furthermore, LATAM is not one unit. You know, you have Mexico and Brazil, two largest countries. They are very different. You have Chile and Argentina, we're neighbors, very different. Colombia and Venezuela, also neighbors, super different also. So, you know, I think you can't lump things together. I think you need to do the work, go in and actually, you know, see what's going on for yourself. So we've been doing that for 25 years on the credit and equity side. I can tell you overall things are a lot better than they were back then. So, you know, indices were mentioned. So Brazil started in 2005, Mexico did it in 2011, Chile has it in 2015, and I think now we have a broader one. So that's definitely getting better. JP Morgan just came out with the ESG indices in the corporate bond space where we invest in. So I think that's very good, and it's good to have the indices. A lot of companies have bad scores because they don't report, not because they don't do anything. So I think that's easy to fix, and that's our role to kind of push them to publish the report and actually take the time. So that's I say those are kind of the easy wins. I would say the governance overall is not that bad. You know, if you think about how directors are elected in most Latin American countries, it's much more representative than here in the US. So, you know, it's not all bad. There's some good things. Tag-along rights have been getting better over the years. We've been involved in that. Independent directors, again, are more prevalent everywhere. Related party transactions have been regulated. So I think there's a lot of good things. They're probably not, you know, going to hit the front page of any newspaper, but I think you need to keep that in mind as an investor to be balanced. One thing that I think we've learned is that it's not all about level. So no, Chilean companies are never going to be like Swedish level, you know, standards on these things. It's not good. It's just, you know, we're coming from a different point. The society's different. Incentives are different. The taxes are different. Regulation is different. But I think what we've found is that trajectory is probably a bigger driver of, you know, of profitability, returns. So the improvement of the level is more important than the actual level. So a company that's a 3 out of 5 going to 4 or 4.5 out of 5 can do a lot better as an investment than a company that's stuck at 4 out of 5, you know, all the time. So I think we need to try to keep that in mind, and that is very consistent with the mandate of the PRI, which is basically to create awareness, to try to get companies and investors to raise the issues and to improve. So the goal is really to improve. So that's important. Exclusions, we think they're backward-looking. We try to be engaged, proactive, and long-term. So we don't like red flags or things that pop up on the violations for the, you know, the principles, the UN, the 10, what they're called. So I think, you know, it's important to keep in mind these issues, but we would not make a decision to divest, for example, based on somebody else's rating. Much like if the credit agencies downgrade a bond, we don't just go and sell it because we have, you know, 50 people doing credit work all day long, and we have our own view on the credit. So I think really there's no substitute for engagement and doing your own work. I think all these indices and scores and service providers, it's very good. It goes in the right direction, but it's our job to make the call. So we use that information, we take it into account, but I don't think it's as easy as just saying, okay, I'll defer to, you know, the index and I'll just let them do the work. You know, I think, well, we're active managers, so we would say that, but we take this very, you know, this is the core of what we do. So that's important for us. I'll just give an example, you know, on Brazil, you know, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela are probably responsible for a bit of this branding issue lately in LATAM. You have Petrobras, who's the largest bond issuer and corporate bond issuer in the whole of emerging markets, not just LATAM. They were investment grade. They issued a lot of paper. Everybody bought it, $40 billion worth of it at coupons of 4 or 5%. You know, very, very happy, investment grade. Nobody said anything. And then the scandal comes out, and there's a lot of corruption, left, right, and center. The company's levering up. They're doing bad investments, bad capital discipline. and suddenly the bonds that were trading at 5% yield are trading at 15% yield, and the investment grade buyer says, oh, I lost 30% of my money in a month. You know, what happened here? So again, there's no substitute for doing the work and engaging yourself. I think it was not a secret that there were a lot of corruption issues at Petrobras, but they hadn't come out, you know, openly. So I'll just give you an example. It's not to say that we know better, but this is just, we did not own any Petrobras securities for 16 years. And the first time we bought them was 2 years ago. And the reason, one reason is, of course, that some of the problems got priced in, and that is one side of it. But the more important one is that there was a new government and a new economic team, finance minister, central bank, head of Petrobras, budget director, came in. And the head of Petrobras in particular, who's since left, had a very clear vision of what they had to do. Now, this is a state-owned enterprise, so the problem with those is that management sort of changes with the political cycle. So it's not like, you know, character is very volatile here, because, you know, you could have a reasonable government today, it could be not reasonable the next one. But in this case, we saw a lot of very meaningful improvements in the way they contracted their work, in the way they, you know, tried to do business in general, and invest the capital, pricing policy for, you know, pricing their gasoline in Brazil, which was before was dictated by the government. They tried to go to an objective formula. So, you know, so I think it's not as easy as saying, okay, these guys messed up, they show up on a negative screen, I'm not going to touch this. I think, you know, in this case, it was kind of the opposite. It was, you wanted to maybe get involved as things were turning for the better. So it's, I think it's tough. And we see this whole ESG exercise as a long-term risk management exercise, meaning that there's some things that if you only look at financial statements, you would miss. So this is a wider perspective and a more 360, you know, evaluation. And the other, obviously, is client demand. So we have, and you mentioned institutional investors in the region. For them, today, this is not, I mean, they know they have to do something. They don't know if it's the PRI or the next one, or, you know, or just impact investing or something else. So I think it's our goal to try to convince them and try to get them on board. But we have a lot of clients from Norway, Finland, Canada, you know, and these people really care about this stuff. So we were doing it, but I think the reason we signed up here is I think it gives a common ground. You become part of a larger movement, and you can actually improve things and have a framework which is easier to get more people involved in.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to summarize, and I had the chance to speak with Juan Luis yesterday, and we talk about engagement. So I really think that's a big challenge we have in LATAM because of the way the market works in some of the countries. Engagement is key because in some cases you need to invest in the companies that are listed in the market. So you don't have the option of not being in that company. So if you have the opportunity to invest in that company and to engage with them, it will make sense to add these environmental, social, and governance issues into the engagement process and hopefully have better companies to invest in the future. And we are running out of time, but I want to use these last minutes just to give you some of the challenge we have, but at the same time, what are the opportunities we are seeing in the region for coming years. So this is the reality, and that's part of what Juan Luis was saying. We have a issue with branding, and these kind of things we don't want to hide the truth. We know the challenge we have, but we also know about the opportunities, and we want to push the agenda about the opportunities the region is providing. So this is part of the challenge, but if you see these kind of things, you can see behind that you're seeing a lot of opportunities around social improvements, around environmental improvements. So there is a lot of things to do in that regard. And then we were talking, and Sonia was telling us about, you know, what happened, for example, in Brazil. And we are seeing that these kind of initiatives and ways to push transparency, it's getting there. So that's why it's so important to use the good examples that Brazil provide us. And we have this challenge. So we know that if we want to engage more institutional investors around the world to look at LATAM and invest in LATAM companies around ESG, we need to improve this. And that's something that we are going to work on through stock exchanges, with the signatories we have and we are going to have in the future. This needs to change. And we know this is something that we can work together to achieve. So I want to just finish, and I want to give you, all of you, an opportunity to tell us once again why you think it's important and why you believe that responsible investment is going to be a key topic in the coming decade in Latin America. So maybe some brief comments about why you think this is a topic that is important for the region coming forward. Amal.
Thank you. Well, I think I would say there's a lot of leadership in the region, in many countries, not all countries, but many countries towards this agenda, towards sustainable development. I think Brazil obviously has been leading the way in many of these issues and topics for many years, for decades actually. But we're seeing, in fact, the countries you put up there probably showing the most leadership on this agenda. And so I think with that level of commitment politically, translating that into the right kinds of frameworks to bring forward the investments and assets that will be attractive, I think will be provides great opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, I think, Eduardo, because there is no other way. I think the responsible investment is the way. And we have seen a great advance for the last years. Now we are seeing the investors asking for this information. For example, next week I'm going to Europe to do a ESG roadshow with my investor relation director. And we were invited by the investors in Europe. So I think the movement is going fast. And I just would like to take the advantage to be with investors here, just to give one message that we receive from the listed companies all the time. The companies complain that the investors don't give feedback to the companies after a meeting, after send a questionnaire, or a demand or something like this. So it's so a value for the companies know what you do after receive the information. So all the time when I'm in an audience like this, I take the advantage to give this message. Please give the feedback to the listed companies. It's so important to them to know it. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I think in Mexico, a lot is going on. It's just that the information is not there. So I would suggest to investors that in addition to talking to companies about what they are doing, they also talk about what is happening, that you engage with government agencies and private sector agencies that are working on issues related to the environment, to organizations like the World Bank and IDB, and so because they have a lot of information as to what is going on that is not publicly available or easy to find. Mexico has a very ambitious agenda in terms of the environment through the signing of the Paris Accord and also through the energy reform. We are in a transition right now because of we're changing governments, and there hasn't been still a lot of, we don't know still how strong the new administration is going to come in terms of pushing forward this agenda. But at least from the private sector, there is a lot of interest. So this is one way to get information. I would also take the opportunity, following your last comment about international investors. You know, you also take more time with companies to talk about ESG. We at Banorte, Marius and I took the opportunity this week to do an ESG roadshow here in the West Coast as we were coming to this conference. And I would say that maybe only 20% of the time that we spent with investors was really spent talking about ESG. The rest was really the usual conversation about strategy or financials or these things. I think we have seen a lot more interest from European investors, and they ask for information. They send us emails, they send us questionnaires, and so on. So I would say also from your side, engage more companies about this, because this is going to help us move forward in these three topics that are quite relevant.
Thank you. So I think I already made my case. I thought I would do 2 minutes or 2 seconds on a case study. So Chile, renewable energies. This is one thing that surprisingly we've been quite good at. So Chile has 60% of the electricity capacity is renewables, but about 40% of the 40 out of 60 is traditional hydro plants, which have all their environmental concerns and flooding and communities displacement and all that. So the government launched about 10 years ago non-conventional renewable energy, which is solar, geothermal, wind, small hydro, which doesn't disrupt the environment, ocean, biomass, that kind of stuff. Today, those sources of energy represent 17% of the installed capacity in the country from zero. If you look this year, 83% of the new capacity that was coming online is of these non-conventional renewable types. There's $100 billion in projects waiting for approval in this, and they've all been funded through the voluntary public markets. There's been some multilateral aid, but this is financeable in the market. It's not driven by subsidies. And Chile is top 10 globally in this field. And the issue with solar and wind is that their load factors are low. So it's about 35% compared to 85% for a combined cycle gas or coal plant. So what the missing link is batteries. So and we actually have lithium. We have the largest or second largest global reserves of lithium in Chile. So Tesla is thinking about building a plant to build batteries, these massive batteries to do energy storage in Chile, which would kind of provide the missing link to be able to go completely, renewable. So Chile thinks that at this point it is possible that we could be 100% renewable by 2040, which is unthinkable. If you told me 10 years ago, it would have been crazy. So this it's a reality. It's happening, right? It's not just people talking on a panel.
Thank you. So thanks a lot to all the panelists, and thanks for you to have the opportunity here to listen about LATAM and to learn more about what is happening, but especially all the opportunities that we have in the region. So thanks a lot, and thanks PRI for this space. Thank you.